All right, Facebook, welcome back. We are live now for the second portion of our teaching. This is where I get to share with you. And I want to welcome everybody here. And in case you are first time you're seeing this, my name is Mike Davis. I'm one of the teachers at the Oasis and one of the leaders there. And I get the privilege of sharing with you this message that we've been doing called Who's the Boss? Women and Men in Biblical and Cultural Contexts. And we have been studying 1 Timothy chapter 2, and we've been looking at primarily the verse 12, where it says in our English translations, one translation like my New King James says, let me read to you from my New King James. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. So I spent literally 8 messages doing what I call a reconstruction of the world of 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12. Because my premise was, if we're going to understand 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12, we need to understand the context. And by context, I mean the historical context, the cultural context, the literary context, the grammatical context. We need to understand all of these contexts to better understand and to better arrive at what exactly was Paul communicating when we get to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12, and he says that he is not permitting a woman to teach or to authentate a man, but to be in silence. What was he saying? And so in our last session, we find, which I entitled, finally, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. What I taught was that 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12 is not a prohibition against women serving as elders or pastors or teachers of men in church or church-related settings. I said that Paul is not prohibiting women from serving alongside men equally with pastoral authority because they're women. Paul is not saying, listen, because you're a woman, you can't be an elder, or you can't have elder type authority and you can't teach men. This is not Paul's point in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12. Now, if this is the first time you're watching this, to arrive at to understand how I got there, you got to go back and watch part 1 all the way through part 8, okay? Because I give the entire context to the best of my ability so we can arrive at what is Paul saying there. But I said that Paul, what he's doing is he is prohibiting, there is a prohibition, he is prohibiting certain wealthy women who are a part of the congregation at Ephesus. He's prohibiting these wealthy women from teaching and spreading false doctrine or false teaching and teaching in a manner that is domineering. This is the conclusion that we came to. And we based this off of several different things. It was based off of grammar. It was based off of cultural context. It was based off of some historical things that going on, well, not so much historical, we didn't get into that a lot, but it was based upon cultural context, the way the wealthy, actually it was based upon some historical and cultural, as we looked at what did the dress of women signify, and also some of the things that Jesus said in the culture and the history of his time, the events of his time, of how wealthy people in the Greco-Roman world, how they thought, and how they treated others. So we looked at all of these different contexts and brought them together and said, this is what Paul is communicating. And this is what I believe Paul is saying about and why women are prohibited. It's not all women, it is certain wealthy women in the congregation at Ephesus. I also said that what Paul was prohibiting, he was prohibiting the same type of attitude and practice, meaning being domineering, being lording it over others. He's prohibiting the same type of attitude and practice that Jesus prohibited to all his disciples when he told them to not act like rich patrons or benefactors in the Greco-Roman world who expected to rule and who lorded it over others because they were rich and thought themselves superior to others. This was part of what was going on in the day. It was part of the culture. Part of it, historically, this was true, that benefactors, those who were wealthy, those who were rich in the Greco-Roman world, and Jesus in Luke chapter 22, verse 24 through 27, specifically speaks to this. And he says to his disciples who were arguing about who's going to be the greatest, who's going to be in charge, who's going to be the boss, Jesus tells them, hey, you see the Gentiles? those who are over them, and those who call themselves their benefactors. These are rich people, wealthy people, well-to-do people who give to others, who give to the city, who give to those who are in need. They become patrons or benefactors, and those who they give to become their clients. Jesus said they lord it over those that they give to. And Jesus says, it shall not be this way with you. And this is spoken of in a negative, not a positive. You can go back and look at the video where I talked about this. I believe it's video number 64. I talked about that, spent an hour and a half speaking to this. And in that video, we talk about specifically what Jesus said, what was going on in the culture of the day, and why Jesus prohibited that. Jesus prohibited to all of his disciples this mindset, this attitude, this disposition where you are lording it over others, where you are trying to rule over others in a domineering, tyrannical way. This is what he's prohibiting, Paul is prohibiting in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 12. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul talks about those who don't adhere to the words of the Lord Jesus. Paul, I believe, is echoing Jesus' teaching that we see in several places, but in the different gospels, but specifically the one we looked at was Luke chapter 22, where Jesus says, you, my disciples, whoever is my disciples, you are not to act like the Gentiles. You're not to lord it over others, because this is what the rich do. And we saw that not only did Jesus say this, also Aristotle, who preceded Jesus, also taught the same thing, that those who are rich, they believed it was their right to rule. Okay. And Jesus, Aristotle said this is the wealthy would do this because they thought themselves superior to others. Okay. And so Jesus recognized this. Aristotle recognized it. Jesus later recognizes Jesus prohibited to all his disciples. Paul is prohibiting it here in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. This is not a prohibition against women being in positions of leadership that are equal to the men. It is not prohibiting women from teaching men. That is not what's talking about at all. I'll say this one more thing because I covered it in video number 64. But when Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 3, he said, I left you in Ephesus in order to tell others, to tell certain ones, literally in the Greek, to tell certain ones, not certain men, certain ones, not to teach other doctrine or to teach false doctrine. That is why Timothy was left in Ephesus. Paul does not say, as I covered in great detail, I left you in Ephesus in order to tell women not to teach other men apostolic doctrine. That was not Timothy's charge. He was charged to teach others. That is what 1 Timothy is about. 1 Timothy is about Paul telling Timothy, this is why you were left there, to tell others who are teaching false doctrine to not teach false doctrine. Paul does not say, and also Timothy, to stop these women from assuming equal authority with men and teaching men apostolic doctrine. That was not the prohibition. Again, go back to lesson number 64. There's a video. You can go to our YouTube channel, KIC TV. If you're watching on YouTube already, you can go to KIC. You can watch lesson number 64, KIC TV with Mike Davis. That's our YouTube channel, and all the lessons are there. Okay, so this is, Paul is not prohibiting women from leadership or equal leadership with men. So we've looked at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12. Now we're going to go on to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13 and 14. Now, I can tell you already, when I was putting together the outline, finalizing it last night, I thought to myself, there is no way I can cover all this material in one session. We would be here for at least 2, maybe 2.5 hours. So this is probably going to be 2 to 3 lessons as I break it down, give it to you a little bit at a time, and then we'll bring it all together. So we're going to be looking at, well, let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 2. We're going to start at verse 12, then read down. So verse 12, Paul says again, and I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. Verse 13, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. Verse 14, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. So what we're going to be looking at, because the question that's before us now is, does verse 13 prove that men are to be the leaders in the church and in the home because Adam was created first? And does this mean that women are to submit to and follow that lead? So does 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, is it teaching that because Adam was created first, therefore men for all times, or at least while we're here on this earth, though there are those who teach for all times, even into eternity, there are those who teach that. Is it teaching that men are to be the leaders, women are to submit to that leadership because Adam was created first? So does chapter 2, verse 13 prove the, quote, headship of men? Okay, that's the question before us. And also, what is Paul trying to tell us in verse 14 when he says, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression? What is that about? What is Paul saying? So we're going to be considering the complementarian view or views where this is concerned, and also the egalitarian views. I'm going to cover the complementarian view because the complementarian view of verse 13 is pretty much across the board the same. So we're going to cover that today, all right? And we're going to be looking at that. And then I will get into, in following sessions, the different, because there are different or differing egalitarian views of verse 13. I'll cover those, okay? So today, part one, we're just going to be looking at the complementarian view of verse 13. So from a complementarian point of view, verses 13 and 14 provide the reason why women are not allowed to be leaders in the church, and for some, also leaders in the home. There are those who think that this speaks to also the home, as well as the church, and there are those who think so. Now, not all complementarians are agreed on this point. So there are some who think that this applies just to the church. There are some who think that this applies to both the church and home. And there are some who believe that this applies to the church, to the home, and society as a whole. That women are, that what Paul is doing in verse 13 is giving the reason why men are supposed to be the leaders, basically why men are to be in charge. So for complementarians, verse 13, because it begins with the word for, provides the reason why. The word for in Greek is the word gar, G-A-R. When we translate it from the Greek into the English, G-A-R is the word gar. And they believe that this provides the reason why. Let me read to you some complementarian views. This is from Dr. Thomas Schreiner from his book, not from his book, but from a book called Two Views on Women in Ministry. And it has four scholars, Dr. Thomas Schreiner, Dr. Craig Blomberg, Dr. Linda Belville, and Dr. Craig Keener. Let me read to you what Dr. Thomas Schreiner has to say about verse 13. This is a complementarian view. He said, we have seen previously that prohibiting a woman from teaching or exercising authority over a man applies to the task of an elder. For elders have a unique responsibility to teach and rule in God's church. Now, again, in video number 64, I provide reasons why I do not believe this is so. But going on, he says, but on what basis does Paul forbid women from teaching and exercising authority? His words in verse 13 provide the reason. For it was Adam who was first created and then Eve. The gar, or the word for, introducing this verse, is best understood as a ground for the command, since a reason naturally follows the prohibition. Women should not teach men or exercise authority over them, because this would violate God's intention in creation. Since Paul appeals to creation, the prohibition transcends culture. So from Dr. Thomas Schreiner's viewpoint, because Paul is using the creation text, he believes therefore this is a principle from creation, and therefore it transcends culture. So meaning that it applies not just to what was going on in Ephesus, this applies to everyone, okay? All right, let me read to you from another book, and this is Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. This is the book that was put together and edited by John Piper and Wayne Grudem, has various scholars. This is what they say on page 40 of Recovering Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Let me get it here, page 40. They state concerning this, when the Bible teaches, quote, when the Bible teaches that men and women fulfill the different roles in relation to each other, charging man with a unique leadership role, it bases this differentiation not on temporary cultural norms, but on permanent facts of creation. In the Bible, differentiated roles for men and women are never traced back to the fall of man and women. Excuse me. In the Bible, differentiated roles for men and women are never traced back to the fall of man and women. I keep reading that wrong. Let me do it one more time. In the Bible, differentiated roles for men and women are never traced back to the fall of man and woman into sin. Rather, the foundation of this differentiation is traced back to the way things were in Eden before sin warped our relationships. Differentiated roles were corrupted, not created by the fall. They were created by God. So Dr. Grudem and Dr. Piper, they also both see, or they understand, that because Paul is appealing to the creation text, therefore Paul is stating something that is from the beginning and is supposed to be universal for all. He says maybe the roles got corrupted later by sin, but this was the way God originally intended it to be. Therefore, it transcends culture. Because one of the things that egalitarians will argue, or mutualists will argue, and that I have argued, is that Paul is dealing with a specific situation at Ephesus, and that these what Paul is saying needs to be interpreted within the context of what was going on at that time. And so that the prohibition, therefore, is going to be constrained by what was going on within the historical context of 1 Timothy chapter 2 and the cultural context. Now, what Grudem and what Piper is arguing against, and many complementarians will argue against, it says no, because Paul appeals to creation, therefore it transcends the culture of Ephesus, and it has to do with men and women today. Paul is citing by quoting creation, Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3. That's where Paul is quoting from. That Paul is applying a universal, or Paul is giving a universal principle that applies to men and women today because he's using a creation text. Okay, that's the idea. That's the framework. That's the belief. Let me quote to you, or read to you another quote, a complementarian quote. This is Dr. Kevin DeYoung in his book, Men and Women in the Church, a Short Biblical Practical Instruction. This is what he has to say. The first reason why women are not to teach or have authority is based on the order of creation. Adam was formed first, then Eve. His thinking is, Paul's thinking, is perfectly consistent with the Old Testament idea of the firstborn. The firstborn was accorded special rights because he was the firstborn in the family, end quote. So what Dr. Kevin DeYoung believes, and what he is stating, is that the reason Paul says that women are not to teach men or have authority, it's based upon the order of creation. Adam was created first. This is in line with the idea of the firstborn. And he says the firstborn was accorded special rights because he was the firstborn in the family. So he sees that the Genesis text portrays Adam, Genesis chapter 2, portrays Adam as the firstborn. And then we know in the ancient Near East, the firstborn had special rights because he was the firstborn in the family. Dr. Wayne Grudem, in his book, Evangelical Feminism and Biblical Truth, offers this same view. Let me read to you from his book. This is the book, Evangelical Feminism and Biblical Truth. On page 67, Dr. Grudem says this. Paul's first reason is and he's talking about 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. Paul's first reason is the order of creation. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. Paul does not use some local situation in Ephesus for a reason, such as saying, for women aren't as well educated there in Ephesus. We're going to be talking about that because there are those who push back against the idea that, well, let me say this. There are egalitarians who will say that the women were not as well educated in Ephesus, and this is why one of the reasons Paul is prohibiting them to teach. There are complementarians who will come behind it and go, no, that's not the reason why. And they give reasons why. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the objections, okay, to egalitarian teachers where this is concerned. He says, Paul does not use some local situation in Ephesus for a reason, such as saying, for women aren't as well educated there in Ephesus, or for you have some disruptive women teaching false doctrine there in Ephesus. Of course, I disagree with this. Again, go back to the past 8 lessons to see why I disagree with this. No, he points back to the original time of creation, before there was any sin in the world, and sees that there was a purpose of God indicated in the order of creation. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. Paul simply assumes that his readers will understand that when God created Adam first and then gave commands to him alone, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, and verse 15 and 17, and then later created Eve, verse 22, that God was giving a leadership role to Adam. So in Dr. Grudem's view, he believes that because it says Adam was formed first, that Paul's readers would assume that they would understand that when God created Adam first and gave commands to him, that he was given a leadership role. Before Eve came along, he was given a leadership role to Adam. He goes on to say, quote, people in the ancient world where the firstborn son had a leadership role in the family would have understood this. But we do not need to assume that Paul was endorsing the entire system of primogeniture. Now, that is the concept that they are dealing with. The ancient world, especially the ancient Near East, is dealing with the concept of primogeniture, the firstborn, okay? So he says here, we do not need to assume that Paul was endorsing the entire system of primogeniture, at least not in all its details. I'm going to come back to that, because notice he says here, we don't have to assume that Paul was endorsing the entire system of primogeniture, at least not in all its details. It is enough simply to say that people were familiar with that system. It is enough simply to say that people who were familiar with that system would have had no trouble understanding Paul's reasoning. What's the reasoning? The firstborn male in any family is assumed to be the leader in that family in his generation, and Adam was the firstborn in his generation, so he was the leader. So again, we see Dr. Grudem also appealing to this first century, biblical concept and custom of the law of primogeniture. And their understanding of it is the firstborn child is automatically assumed to be the leader in the family. They're the firstborn male, therefore they are the leader in the family. Adam was the, quote, firstborn. But we have to say the text does not say he was born. It says he was created, he was formed, but okay. But because he was created first, therefore, Adam is the leader, because the people would have understood, oh, well, he's the firstborn, and therefore he is the leader. So that is how Dr. Grudem sees this. And most, if not all, complementarians, I haven't seen a complementarian yet that doesn't hold this view, but so most, if not all, hold this view, that when God is referring to Adam as created first, he is appealing to the concept of primogeniture, meaning that the firstborn male, in their view, becomes the leader. Now you may say, well, why do you keep saying their view? I'm going to explain in a moment. That the firstborn male becomes the leader of the family. And so they appeal to the creation order of Adam and Eve in Genesis 2, and they appeal to the ancient Near Eastern concept of primogeniture as proof that men are called of God to lead in the church and in the home by extension, or vice versa, that men are called to lead in the home and by extension in the church. And they believe that this is because Adam, who is representing all men, in their view, Adam represents all men, Eve represents all women. So because Adam was created first, he was the leader, therefore all men are the leader. And because Eve was created after, she is to be submitted to Adam's leadership. And because Eve is the representative of all women, therefore all women are to be submitted to men, their husbands, and leadership in the church. Some will say women are supposed to be submitted to all men. There are disagreements in the complementarian world where this is concerned. There are those who say, no, women are not submitted to all men. They are submitted to their husbands. Or if they go to church, they're submitted to the male leadership in terms of following the leadership of the men in the church. So there's some differences there, even in the complementarian world. But the main idea is that the women are supposed to be submitted to male headship, as they defined it. However it works out, women are submitted to men because Adam was created first. Therefore, men are in charge, and Eve was created second in submission to Adam's leadership. Therefore, all women are in submission to male leadership. Got it? All right. So I have pointed out many times throughout this series, and actually taught on it somewhat in our Old Testament series, that there's a problem with this view of using primogeniture. And there's a problem with this view. There's a problem with this interpretation when you're using the ancient Near Eastern concept of primogeniture to prove this point. There's a problem with it. And I believe that when you start looking at the details of primogeniture, it undoes the interpretation. This is why I find it, what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say amusing, a little bit amusing and curious, that I would use the word curious, that Dr. Grudem says, well, we don't have to assume that Paul embraces all of the details. Okay, well, why not? We're going to talk about this. Okay, so what is primogeniture in the ancient Near East? Now, the way it is usually defined within complementarian theology is that the firstborn male becomes the leader of the family. It's like automatic. He is the leader of the family. But is this the ancient Near Eastern concept of primogeniture? And I must say, I'm talking about the ancient Near East. So since we're using Adam, we're talking about the ancient Near Eastern concept pre-Torah, before the law was given. Because after the law is given, the concept of primogeniture for Israel becomes encoded within law. And there are certain things that are said, that are settled, that this is the way it's supposed to be done. But before the Torah is given, there was this concept in the ancient Near East and practiced by the forefathers of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, was practiced by them. And it follows more closely the ancient Near Eastern custom of primogeniture, which we're going to talk about. Okay, when they are engaged in the ancient Near Eastern custom of primogeniture, they're following more of the ancient Near Eastern concept and practices versus the practice as it was established in the Torah later. The Torah concept and practice of primogeniture is slightly different because it gets encoded that the way things are supposed to be. So in the ancient Near East, primogeniture is a status that is given to a male born in the family. Notice how I said that. Primogeniture is a status that is given to a male born in the family. Notice what I did not say. This is where complementarians, based upon the evidence and the research that I've done, get it wrong. I did not say that primogeniture in the ancient Near East is a status that is given to the firstborn male in the family. I specifically worded it in the way that I did. Primogeniture is a status, excuse me, I should say the firstborn is a status that is given to a male born in the family. The male designated as the firstborn, in Hebrew it is the Bechor, B-E-K-O-R, the Bechor, is given the leadership of the family, and he is given a double portion of inheritance from the father because he is responsible for the entire family once the father dies. But this is a status that is given. There are rights and privileges that go along with it. So again, notice that I said that that a male is designated as firstborn or as the Bechor. This is because in the ancient Near East, the status of firstborn was not automatically given to the firstborn male in the city. Now we're talking, in the family. We're talking about pre-Torah. After the Torah is given, God lays down rules that the firstborn male is always the firstborn. But prior to the Torah, it is simply not true that if you are the firstborn male, you are therefore the firstborn in the sense of having the status, the rights, and the privileges of the firstborn. Let me say that again, because I don't want people to misunderstand. If you are the firstborn male, that does not mean you have the status of firstborn in terms of, or you don't have all of the rights and privileges and status of the firstborn. Okay, you don't have all the rights, privileges, and status. Even though you are born the first male in the family, does not necessarily mean you carry all of the status, the rights, and the privileges of the Bechor, because that is a status with rights and privileges that is bestowed by the father, not by virtue of birth. It is bestowed by the father. The father chooses who is the Bechor, who is the person in the family who will take after, who will be in charge after I'm gone. The father is the one who determined that. So in other words, just because you were male and just because you were born first does not automatically make you the firstborn, does not automatically give you the status, does not automatically give you the privileges, does not automatically make you the leader, just because you are the firstborn. There is a scholar by the name of Christopher Wright Mitchell. He wrote a book called The Meaning of Barak, to bless in the Old Testament. It's this book right here. I've had this book for years. You may not be able to see it because of the lighting here, but I've had this book for years, and he has a section here where he talks about the Bechor. Let me read to you what he says. He says, second, the status of being the firstborn was, now notice what he says, the status of being the firstborn was not necessarily determined by order of birth. In several tablets, these are ancient Near Eastern tablets that were found, the father decreed that someone other than the first son born was to have the status of the firstborn, which entitled him to a double share of the inheritance. Now notice this. So they have several tablets in the ancient Near East where it is not the firstborn male son that the father decrees has the status of the firstborn. The father gave that status to another child, to another male child to another male child. So it's the father who determined who possessed the status. He goes on to say, in case of adoption, an adopted son had the status of the firstborn only as long as no natural sons were born. A natural son, though, born later, outranked an adopted son. Genesis 15, verse 2 through 4 indicates that the patriarchs followed the same legal practice regarding adoption. He goes on to say, so if, and this was true, so in the ancient Near East, if you did not have a son, you could adopt someone else to be your son, and that person would, according to the father, would grant that adopted child the status of firstborn. Remember when Abraham makes the statement to God, he goes, God, I don't have an heir, and one born in my own household, one of his slaves, is going to be my heir, is going to be my firstborn. So he was concerned, God, you've not given me a child. This firstborn status, the one who inherits everything, the one who has all the rights and privileges and will be in charge when I'm gone, it's going to go to one of my servants, Eliezer. Okay? And God speaks to him and makes him the promise, no, there's going to be one born from you. But what that shows us is the ancient Near Eastern custom. Abraham didn't have a child. He was concerned about that. So he was going to adopt Eliezer, his servant, to be his firstborn. Now, this would happen in the ancient Near East based upon the work of Christopher Wright Mitchell and another scholar that I'm going to talk about in just two other scholars who talk about this. So if you adopted a son, what often would happen sometimes, you would adopt a son, or they would have a son with maybe one of their handmaidens or one of their female slaves. They would have a son with that person. That person, that son that they had with the female slave or handmaiden, would become would have the status, according to the father, of the firstborn. We see this with Sarah and Hagar, right? What does Sarah do? Sarah says Sarah's not having a child. She's getting tired of waiting. She says, take my handmaiden, my servant, my slave, Hagar, and through her, we'll have children. Maybe the Lord is going to fulfill the promise that way. Well, they have Ishmael. And what the scholars are saying is that often what will happen is, and we see this in different stories, in different tablets, once they had a child by, let's say, a handmaiden like Hagar, the wife would get pregnant. Well, when the wife got pregnant, guess what? The firstborn status now switches back to the child of the first wife. But here's the thing. It is the father who decided that. It wasn't automatic. it was naturally assumed often, or as a norm, the firstborn male in the family would be the one in charge, but it's the father who would determine that. So it wasn't automatic in the sense of you're firstborn, boom, you're in charge. It was you're the firstborn, it is to be expected, and at a specific time and place, the father will bestow upon you the status of firstborn. Let me say that again. At a specific time and place, the father is going to bestow the status of firstborn. Okay, so you didn't have it automatically. It was assumed, if you were the firstborn male, that you would be the one in charge, but the father had to establish that for you. So, but a person who's adopted could have the status of firstborn, even though it was not literally, the person was not born from the father, was not his biological child. A person adopted, a slave like Eliezer, could be the firstborn. As a matter of fact, let's just go look at it real quick. It wasn't in my note. Go over to Genesis 15 so we can actually read it. I guess we should go ahead and so you can see what's going on here. This is why it's important to understand the cultural background, because we read these things and the people who originally were reading this understood the culture. But we have to do some research to try to get back into the mindset of the people of that time period so that when we're reading it, we're picking up on the same clues, the same understanding. It says, Genesis 15, verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceeding great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir, which means that Abraham had adopted Eliezer to be his firstborn. He had conferred upon him the status, the rights, and the privileges of the firstborn, even though he was not his biological son. But he established, so this was not his son from a handmaiden. This was someone born in his household. Evidently, Eliezer had proven himself to be faithful. It appears that probably Abraham had some affection for him. He had adopted him to be his heir. And of course, let's read the rest of it. I didn't realize we didn't read the rest of this. God goes on to say to him, and behold, the word of the Lord, verse 4, came to him saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. So God lets him know you're going to have one that comes from your own body, a biological son, who will be your heir. And within the culture of the ancient Near East, once Isaac is born, Eliezer is no longer the Bakor. He no longer holds that status. It reverts back to the biological son of Abraham. However, it has to be bestowed by Abraham. Abraham has to, because Abraham can say if he chooses, nah, I want Eliezer to be the firstborn or have that status. He could actually do that, all right? It was within the culture of the day where he could do that. Let's put it like this. It was in his rights to be able to do that, all right? So again, let me go back and finish reading from Christopher Wright Mitchell. He goes on to say, the importance of all of this for Genesis 27 is that in matters of birthright, the father's decree could reverse the natural order. The term older was a relative concept from a socio-juridical viewpoint. This explains why Jacob made such an effort to obtain Isaac's blessing. If he obtained it, he would be the legal firstborn, even though he was born second. Now, this is dealing with the story of Jacob and Esau. Esau sought the blessing from his father Isaac. He sought the birthright because legally, this would make him, and words spoken would have they would be binding legally. It was like a verbal contract in one sense. I'm using it as an analogy. But once he said it, this is why Isaac said, I can't reverse it. Okay, it became legal and binding once he gave him the blessing. So he goes on to say, this explains why Jacob made such an effort to obtain Isaac's blessing. If he obtained it, he would be the legal firstborn, even though he was born second. Jacob cannot be faulted for trying to obtain the birthright, since legally it did not, notice this, legally it did not belong to Esau automatically. Even though Esau was the first one born, it did not belong to him automatically. This is even outside of the fact that God decreed that the older shall serve the younger. Legally speaking, within the terms of the culture and the norms of the day, the birthright, the status did not legally belong to Esau automatically, even though he was the first male out of the womb. Follow me with that? Okay, so Jacob cannot be faulted for trying to obtain the birthright, since legally it did not belong to Esau automatically. It belonged to whomever the father chose to give it, though ordinarily he would give it to the chronological firstborn. So again, according to according to the norms and the customs of the day, normally this status, it's the rights and privileges of the firstborn, would be given to the child chronologically, the male child who was born first. But legally, it did not belong to them until the father bestowed it upon them. I want you all to follow me on that. Okay, so the father had to make an official bestowment of the status so that that person would be recognized as the firstborn with all the status, rights, and privileges. Okay, it would be expected that the firstborn chronological male would be the one. So he could be born first. I'll put it like this. He could be born first, but that doesn't mean he had firstborn status, privileges, and rights automatically. Okay. He didn't have it automatically. He didn't have it legally. Okay. So there's another scholar by the name of Tikva Frymer-Kinsky. We've talked about her before in this series. She wrote an article called Patriarchal Family Relationships and Near Eastern Law. It's in the Biblical Archaeologist. It's a magazine, the Biblical Archaeologist, volume 44, number 4. What's cool is this. If you type in patriarchal family relationships and Near Eastern law in Google, it will come up. Somebody posted it online. You can read the article for free. But this is what she says in her article. Quote, the Bible contains a consistent motif of the choosing of the younger son over the older. God's plans unfold through such choice, and primacy is not automatically achieved by birth rank. Now, keep in mind, this is what the complementarian argument is. Adam is born first. Adam has primacy by being created first, not born first, but created first. Therefore, he is the leader. But as we look in the biblical text, God's plans unfold through such choice, meaning the younger being chosen over the older, and primacy is not automatically achieved by birth rank. In order to achieve this aim, however, God, this is important, God does not have to act in an arbitrary or capricious manner or to distort society by disrupting the expected norms. For in the Near Eastern milieu, the term firstborn, like the terms son, father, brother, and sister, is essentially a description of a particular juridical relationship which may be entered into by contract as well as by birth. People in the ancient Near East, they adopt each other as brothers, brothers adopt each other as sons, brothers adopt women as sisters, and the designation of an individual as firstborn can also be a matter of choice. So once again, we hear from another scholar that primogeniture is not automatic. It is a choice. And people can adopt, brothers can adopt another brother to be his firstborn. Now, because usually it always goes to the male. So that's just the way it was. It went to the male. And that's going to be important also as we talk about this in relation to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. And what she says here is that terms like son, father, brother, and sisters, these are really juridical relationships that can be entered into by contract. Okay, so a king, a powerful king, could adopt a less powerful king, and that less powerful king, he will call him son, and the less powerful king will call the powerful king father. Okay, it becomes a contract. Or you could have two kings come together and they refer to each other as brothers, even though they are not biologically related. And you can have someone choose a male to be his firstborn. As it says here, firstborn can also be a matter of choice. It is not automatic. Okay? Let me refer to you one more scholars. In the mouth of two or three witnesses, let every word be established. Let me give you one more. This is from, I believe it's Caillou Seop. If I'm pronouncing this wrong, please forgive me. Kim, K-Y-U, S-E-O-P, and Kim. Some refer to him as Dr. Kim. He wrote a book called The Firstborn Son in Ancient Judaism and Early Christianity. In chapter 2 of his book, he asked the question, did the first male offspring automatically become the Bechor, the firstborn son? And he begins to cite scholars who have researched this question. One of the scholars he quotes, and this is how I found the article, is Tikva Freimer Kinski. Now, Kim concludes that, quote, the status of the Bechor, or the firstborn, could be transferred like Esau and Jacob, and one did not become Bechor or firstborn by virtue of birth, but by appointment of one's father or grandfather. Let me say this again. I'm going to read it again without all the stuff I have in parentheses. The status of the Bechor, or the firstborn, could be transferred. Esau's birthright was transferred to Jacob, and one did not become Bechor by virtue of birth, but by appointment of one's father or grandfather. Go over in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 48. Because a father or grandfather. Because as long as a father was alive, he was in charge of the family. And the father was the one who decided who would be the firstborn. The father could also apply this where his grandchildren are concerned. We see this in Genesis chapter 48. Jacob is with his son Joseph, whom he has not seen in a while. It says, so let me get a sip of water real quick. Excuse me. So Jacob brought them, let me back up. Verse 8 of chapter 48. Then Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, who are these? Joseph said to his father, they are my sons who God has given me in this place. And he said, please bring them to me and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age so that he could not see. Then Joseph brought them near him and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I had not thought to see your face, but in fact, God has also shown me your offspring. Sounds very touching to me as I'm reading this. So Joseph brought them from beside his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near. Then Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, who was the older, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. Now he put his left hand on Manasseh. The hand of blessing was the right hand. He put that on Ephraim, the younger's head, and he blessed them. Now in verse 17, it says, now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, the younger, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused and said, I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations. So he blessed them that day, saying, by you Israel will bless, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And thus he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So here we see a grandfather choosing who has the status, the privilege, and the rights of the firstborn. Because Jacob is the patriarch of the family, he gets to choose. It is not automatically. Now notice, it is expected, because it's the norm, that the firstborn male gets the status, gets the rights, gets the privilege of the Bechor, the firstborn. This is why Joseph says, no, father, you're getting this wrong. Manasseh's the, he goes, I know, but I know what I'm doing. It is the younger who shall have the status, the privilege, and the rights of the firstborn. But Joseph was able Joseph had the right to decide, to declare who has the status of the Bakor, who has the rights, the privilege, and the status. So, just like Dr. Kim said, the status of the Bakor could be transferred, and one did not become Bakor or firstborn by virtue of birth, but by appointment of one's father or one's grandfather, because he would be in charge. Jacob was in charge of everybody until he died. That's the way it was in the ancient Near East. Even though his sons were grown, had their own wife, Jacob was the patriarch of the family. He was the one that was in charge. It's like, for me, I have a lot of brothers and a sister. I have one sister. I'm the oldest of 9. Okay. My wife is the oldest of 9. So we have a lot of siblings. If we were living in the ancient Near East, because my father has passed away, I would be in charge of the entire family. I get a double portion. Now, I would be in charge if my father had bestowed upon me the status of firstborn. My youngest brother, if my father said, nope, we're going to give the status of the firstborn to your youngest brother, Evans, then he would have the status, the privilege, right of the firstborn. He would be the one in charge. Okay? It was the father who decided. Normally, it is expected that the firstborn male, which would have been me, is going to carry the status and who's going to carry the title, the status, the privileges, and the responsibility. But if the father chooses someone else, they are the one who gets the status. If he chooses another male sibling in the family, or if he chooses someone outside of the family, which normally would not happen unless you just didn't have children. But if whoever the father chooses to have that status, that is going to be the firstborn. Now, Kim goes on to show in his book that the title of Bakor, the title of firstborn, could be retained by the firstborn male. So in Jacob's case, his firstborn was, I believe it was Reuben. Could be wrong about that. I believe it was Reuben. Reuben was, and there are times I believe when Reuben is called the firstborn. So he could maintain the title, signifying the fact he is the firstborn male out of the womb, but it's nominal. He has the title, but there's nothing attached to it because he doesn't have the status. Because when you look at the story of Jacob, who gets the status, the privileges, and the rights of the firstborn? Who gets it? It's Joseph. Joseph gets the status, the privileges, and the rights, the double portion of the firstborn. Let me read to you from Deuteronomy chapter 33. Deuteronomy chapter 33. Now, I know I'm saying a lot, but it's to build a case here, and then we're going to go back to and apply this back to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. So in Deuteronomy chapter 33, Moses is blessing the children of Israel. When he gets to Joseph, it says in verse 13, and of Joseph he said, blessed of the Lord is his land, with the precious things of heaven, with the dew and the deep lying beneath, with the precious fruits of the sun, with the precious produce of the months, with the best things of the ancient mountains, with the precious things of the everlasting hill, with the precious things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the bush. Let the blessings come on the head of Joseph, and on the crown, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. His glory is like a firstborn bull, and his horns like the horns of the wild ox. Together with them he shall push the people to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. Notice that Ephraim has 10,000s, and Manasseh only has thousands. Once again, Joseph, his glory is like a firstborn bull. He has the status, he has the rights, he has the privilege, he has the blessing of the firstborn, as does his youngest son, Ephraim. Joseph was not the oldest. He came much later. He was not the oldest. Okay? But there was bestowed upon him the blessing, the status, the rights, the privilege of the firstborn, and his youngest son, Ephraim, it was bestowed upon him by Joseph's father, Jacob, or Israel. Okay? So, does this mean that Reuben, the firstborn, was never called the firstborn? Yes, he was at times in the scripture called and referred to, and in other literature, he's referred to as the firstborn. But it's nominal. It's in name only. He doesn't have the status. He doesn't have the rights. He doesn't have the privilege. He doesn't have the blessing of the Bakor. It went to Joseph and it went to Ephraim. Okay, so this is what Kim talks about in his book on page 48. So though as a norm in pre-Torah Israel and in the ancient Near East, it was expected that the firstborn male would have the status of Bakor bestowed upon him, this was not automatic. It had to be bestowed by the father who could give that status, who had the right to give that status to another. So being the firstborn male or the first one formed would not automatically make you the leader. Let me say that again for the people in the back. So being the firstborn male or the first one formed would not automatically make you the leader. You did not automatically have the status, the rights, the privilege, the leadership of the firstborn and everything that goes with that title, just because you were the first male born or the first male created. It was not automatic. The father had to choose it. Okay? So this is one of the problems that we have with the idea that in Genesis, that in 1 Timothy chapter 2, that Paul is appealing to the law of primogeniture to prove that Adam is the leader. Because that's not the way the law of primogeniture works. Just because Adam was first does not automatically mean Adam is the leader. That's not the way primogeniture worked pre-Torah. Now, after the Torah was written, it was encoded within Torah. It was established within Torah. The firstborn male out of the womb is always the firstborn. And to him goes the status, the rights, the privileges, the leadership. But pre-Torah, the time when Adam was born, this was not the case. Now, this leads to a second problem. It is said of Adam that he was formed first. He was formed first. Yes, he was created first. But nowhere in the biblical text is Adam called the firstborn of God. Nowhere is he called the firstborn of God. There is no proclamation made that Adam is the firstborn. If God had made that proclamation, that would have bestowed upon him the rights, the privileges, the status. But nowhere in Scripture. He is created first, yes, according to the biblical text, but nowhere is he called the firstborn. The word for firstborn is prototokos, and it is consistently used in the New Testament to refer to Jesus in this way. Jesus is consistently referred to as the firstborn. The word in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13 is not prototokos, it is protos. And it is not used in the New Testament to refer to the firstborn. When the word firstborn in the New Testament is used, it always uses the term prototokos or prototokos. Tokos, one of them. Proto, it's Prototokos. So prototokos. So I'm going to pronounce it. If I'm wrong, I'll come back and change it. My point here is this. Adam is never referred to as the prototokos. Jesus is. And that's also based upon a prophecy in the Psalms where it talks about when he brings the firstborn into the world, and the New Testament authors applies this messianically to Jesus. He is called the firstborn. So Jesus, and in the book of Hebrews, Jesus is referred to as the firstborn. In the book of Colossians, he is referred to as the firstborn. Jesus is proclaimed by God to be the firstborn. We never see Adam referred to by God or anyone else in the biblical text as the firstborn. Okay? And so neither in Genesis chapter 1 or chapter 2 is Adam proclaimed by God to be the firstborn. Keep in mind, in order to have the status, the privilege, the blessing of the firstborn, the father has to bestow that upon you. It is a legal contract. We never see God doing that with Adam. Okay? Nor do we see Adam being given a double portion of creation or authority. Adam is not given a double portion of creation or authority. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 and 6, we see that the male and the female are given equal authority and dominion over the entire earth. Let's go over to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. Now, there are some who don't hold that Adam and Eve are being spoken of in Genesis chapter 1. There are those who do. For the sake of argument, we're going to say Adam and Eve are the first human beings, okay? and that this would apply to them at the very least. Then God said in verse 26, or Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, then God says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image, or mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, notice, God is not speaking only to the male. He is speaking to the male and the female. And he says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion. Who's supposed to have dominion? Them, male and female. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, 27, and on to 28, both the male and the female are given equal authority. They're given joint authority and dominion over the entirety of creation. God does not say to the male, oh, by the way, you're a little bit more in charge because you're created first. He doesn't do that. So if we take Genesis, and I've said this before, Genesis chapter 1 gives us the creation story. God created them male and female. Genesis chapter 2, we have a breakdown of how the creation occurred. God creates man from the dust, from the Adamah of the earth. Okay? Then he builds the woman from the side of the man. If Genesis 1 is connected to Genesis 2, when he presents them before them, he says to both of them, I give you both authority and dominion. You both are created in my image. You both are my royal ambassador, my vice regents over the earth. You both are to rule. You both have equal authority and dominion over all of the creation. All of creation belongs to the both of you as my stewards. They are given an equal inheritance, the man and the woman equally. Nowhere, even in Genesis chapter 2, nowhere is it said, oh, and Adam, you're both equal, but Adam, you're a little bit more equal. Okay? Nowhere is it said, Adam, you are the firstborn, you're in charge of Eve. Nowhere is this said. Nowhere. And often egalitarians will be accused of reading more into the text than what's there. I don't see how you can read that Adam is in charge. They said, well, it says that Adam was created first. Therefore, he is, according to the laws of primogeniture, he's the firstborn, he's in charge. But we've already established that primogeniture, being created first, being born first, does not automatically make you in charge. And based upon the creation text, we see God places them both equally in charge. In order to read 1 Timothy chapter 2, as Adam being created first, and therefore he is in charge, we have to ignore Genesis chapter 1. We have to claim then that Paul ignored Genesis chapter 1, where both male and female are given equal authority. Paul knew his Bible better than that. Paul is not ignoring Genesis chapter 1 and saying, well, Adam was created first, therefore he's in charge. That's not what Paul's doing. That's not how Paul is interpreting the text. So if anything, in Genesis chapter 1, we see that they are both given equal authority. They're both given an equal inheritance. They both have stewardship over the earth. If anything, this is what I would say. If anything, they both, Adam and Eve, male and female, share firstborn status and responsibilities. They both share firstborn status and responsibility. They have the entire earth. They have both authority and dominion. They both are in charge, and one is not made more in charge than the other. They share it equally, okay? So that is the second problem. The second problem, the reason, what I'm saying is, the reason the interpretation that first means primogeniture, meaning that Adam is in charge, meaning therefore all men are in charge, it doesn't work, because if we go back and we look at it in context, what are you going to do with what are you going to do with Genesis chapter 1 if you're saying Adam is in charge because he was created first, where nowhere in Genesis 1 or in Genesis 2 does it indicate that. Nowhere does God say you're in charge. Matter of fact, in Genesis chapter 1, when God does place something in charge, he says it directly. He says, he placed the moon and the stars, and it says the moon to rule by day and the sun, the sun to rule by day and the moon to rule at night. We are specifically told this. We are specifically told mankind, male and female, are to rule over all of the animals and over all of the earth. We are specifically told that. But we are never specifically told Adam is to rule over the woman until we get to Genesis chapter 3. And even Dr. Grudem says you can't use Genesis chapter 3 to prove the rulership of men because that's the fall. Now, not all complementarians agree with that. There are those who say, no, God is just stating what was already before. But again, we don't see this before. We don't see Adam being given rule over Eve in Genesis 1 or in Genesis 2. It is never stated. When something is supposed to rule over something else, it is stated. It is stated, and it's never stated that Adam in Genesis 1 or 2 is to rule, or the man is to rule over the woman. So in my opinion, again, primogeniture just doesn't work for that reason. Third problem. This leads us to the third problem. The firstborn status was to be determined among male siblings. So who was the firstborn? Who had the status, privilege, and leadership of the family? If you've got a bunch of boys, you have to pick one. It was something that the status was to be determined among the male siblings. So here's some problems. Number one, Adam and Eve are never portrayed as siblings. They're never portrayed as siblings. Adam and Eve are portrayed as husband and wife, never siblings. I had somebody try to argue with me on that on YouTube. They were like, well, Adam was the son of God, so that makes Eve the daughter of God. The point is that they are never, ever portrayed as brother and sister. From the gate, from the beginning, they are portrayed as husband and wife. So that's a problem right there. It's not about siblings and who among the siblings get to be in charge. Adam and Eve are not siblings, they're husband and wife. And also Eve is female, not male. Eve is a female, she's not male. So for these reasons, because of how primogeniture worked in the first century, it was the choice of the father. It was not automatic because you were born male. And because nowhere in the biblical text is Adam ever called the firstborn of God. He is never referred to as the firstborn of God. And Adam and Eve are equally given authority and dominion. In my opinion, they're sharing what we would call firstborn status, though they're never called that. But they're, in terms of status, in terms of responsibility, in terms of blessing, they share that equally. They share that equally. And then number three, the firstborn status was to be determined among male siblings. Adam and Eve are never portrayed as siblings. Adam and Eve are always portrayed as husband and wife. So for these reasons, I say the use of primogeniture, the ancient Near Eastern concept of primogeniture, to interpret formed first in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13, to prove that men are to be the leaders in the home and in the church, just doesn't work. It goes contrary to what we know historically. It goes contrary to what we know culturally concerning the ancient Near Eastern, the ancient Near Eastern practice of primogeniture before it was encoded and legislated within the Torah. Grudem, again, to go back to what he said in writing about primogeniture, he said this, quote, "We do not have to assume that Paul was endorsing the entire system of primogeniture, at least not in all its details. But I have to ask, what is Dr. Grudem's basis for such a statement? What is his basis for saying that we don't have to assume that Paul was endorsing the entire system? How do we decide what details to leave in and leave out of that system? How do we decide which points or which aspects of primogeniture are important for Paul's points and which are not? If you say, well, the fact that he was born first, yeah, but primogeniture does not mean that simply because you are born first, you are ipso facto the leader. The father has to choose you. We never see God saying to Adam, you get to be in charge, and Eve has to follow your lead. We never see that. We do see the father making proclamations that Jesus is the firstborn. So we know that Jesus is the firstborn. He's the firstborn of creation. The Father declares this about the Son of God. We never see such a proclamation. So again, God is operating within the ancient Near Eastern concept. He proclaims his son, Jesus, Yeshua, he proclaims him to be the firstborn. He bestows upon him the rights, the privileges, the status. We never see this happening with Adam in contrast to Eve. What we do see is God saying to both the male and the female, You both have authority. You both have blessing. You both have the inheritance of the entire earth. That's what we see. Okay. So for Dr. Grudem to say, let me say this. Dr. Grudem also states the firstborn male in any family is assumed to be the leader in the family in his generation, and Adam was the firstborn in his generation, so he was the leader. But as we have seen, this is not the case. Adam is never again declared firstborn in contrast to Eve. Rather, both male and female are given authority, dominion, and stewardship equally over the earth. Okay? So for this reason, and this is where I'm going to stop, I conclude that 1 Timothy 2:13 is not teaching a universal transcultural creation order principle and design that gives Adam leadership over man and therefore gives authority and leadership of men over women in the home and in the church. This is not what formed first means. You can't use primogeniture to prove it because it doesn't line up with the historical and cultural facts that we know about primogeniture. All right. You say, well, Mike, what does it mean when it says Adam was formed first? We're going to talk about protos and first more next week, Lord willing. All right. So did you get a lot out of this? Was this helpful? Okay. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to do something. I'm going to ask you to share this video. A friend of mine, Charles Starkey, said, Mike, you can tell people to share the videos. So Charles, I'm doing it. Share the videos, share the YouTube link with people that you know or think might be benefited from hearing this message, especially if you got pastors who are struggling with this, or women who are in ministry that are struggling with this, or women who are thinking about going in ministry, but they're struggling with 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 12 and verse 13 and verse 14. And by the way, we're going to be talking about this whole thing about, are women more susceptible to deception than men? We're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about verse 15 and what is it talking about when it says that women shall be saved through childbearing. And I'm going to be presenting egalitarian views on this also. Okay, so stay with us. It takes time to break this all down. But again, if this is a blessing to you, please share this with other people. Share this video. This will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, KIC TV. That's Keeping It in Context TV. If you're watching us on KIC TV, please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button that way and hit the notification. That way you will know when new videos come up. And also share this with other people so we can get the message out there. All right. God bless you. Thank you for joining us. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week as we talk some more about what does it mean to say that Adam was formed first, then Eve. Bye-bye.